She handed him her resignation on a Thursday morning. He set it on the table between them and did not look at it. He looked at her. That was the whole problem. That had always been the whole problem. Some people walk through a door and leave a room brighter. Others leave the air thinner when they go. Kenji Mori had never in his life asked anyone to stay. He was asking now, and she was standing in front of him, trying to remember every reason she had decided to leave, and every one of them felt smaller than it had in her apartment at 7 in the morning. Before we get into it, if you have ever given someone everything you had and then been told to wait while they decided whether it was enough, this story is for you. What she did not know was that he had already made up his mind. He just had not yet figured out how to pay the price. Subscribe so you do not miss part 2. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We read every single one. Amara Osei had been in Japan for 3 years when all of this began. She was 31. She had the kind of calm that comes not from ease, but from surviving things that required it. She worked the late shift at a hospital in a district that never went quiet. That meant she saw the city at its most honest. After midnight, when the suits came off and the wounds showed, she was good at her job. Genuinely good. The kind of good you cannot fake because it lives in the hands and not just the head. She could find a vein in the dark. She could tell from across a room whether someone's color was wrong. She had kept 3 people alive on nights when the attending physician arrived 14 minutes too late. She had not mentioned any of their names to anyone. That was not the kind of person she was. The nurses on her floor called her Amara-san, even though she had given them her surname twice. She let it go. She was used to people seeing part of her and deciding they had seen enough. The night Kenji Mori came in, she was 11 hours into a 12-hour shift. She was counting supplies. She knew by 9 o'clock which items would run short before 3 in the morning. She had already flagged 2 on the department log. The charge nurse, Hayashi, had been doing this job for 20 years. She had the posture of someone carrying all of them. She told Amara to write a formal request in triplicate. Amara wrote it. She also quietly moved 3 backup units into the trauma bay cupboard. That was where they would be needed, not in the supply closet where they would be technically correct. That was the kind of person she was. Practical, quiet about it. The call came at 11:47. 6 men. Vehicle accident. Possible internal injuries. 4 minutes out. The charge nurse had stepped away on something she said was urgent. Amara looked at the 2 junior nurses behind her. One was 19 months out of school. The other, 7, she said. Get the bay open. I will be there. She was there first. She always was. 4 of the 6 men were walking wounded. The 5th had a broken wrist and noise about it. The 6th was Kenji Mori. He was not making any noise at all. That was how she knew he was the one she needed to worry about. He was carried in by 2 men who did not look like men who carried people. They were large and quiet. Their suits cost more than a month of her wages. There was something in the way they moved around him. Not bodyguard efficiency. Something older. Something almost like devotion. One of them said quietly that the hospital did not normally admit people with certain associations. Amara cut him off. She said she was aware of the policy. She was also aware that this man was going into shock. She was going to help him now. They could call whoever they needed to call after she did. The 2 men looked at each other. They stepped back. She cut away his shirt. The tattoo covered everything from his shoulders to his waist. A dragon on the left. Scales rendered in blue-black ink so fine they looked like moving water. A phoenix on the right. Tail feathers spreading down his ribs. She had seen tattoos before. She had never seen anything like this. She noted it, set it aside, and pressed 2 fingers below his lowest rib to find what was happening underneath the art. Cracked ribs. Possible bruising to the spleen. Nothing that would kill him tonight if she kept him still and kept his pressure stable. She told the junior nurse what she needed. She told the other to call radiology. She held a compress against his side, and she talked to him. Quietly, about nothing in particular. That was what you did when someone was frightened and too proud to show it. He said, quietly, that he was not frightened. She said she knew. She kept talking. His pressure stabilized. He stayed conscious. He was not going to die in her bay on a Thursday night in November. She considered that a reasonable outcome. 30 minutes earlier, it had not been certain. The attending physician arrived at 12:22. He saw the tattoo. He saw the men in suits in the corridor. He said he would need to review the admission protocol before proceeding. He found a compelling reason to be elsewhere. He was gone in under 4 minutes. Amara looked at the junior nurse. The junior nurse looked at the floor. Amara said she was going to continue treatment. They were going to assist her. If anyone wanted to put that in writing, they were welcome to. Nobody put it in writing. Hours later, when the man was stable, and the bay had been cleaned, and the paperwork was done the way paperwork gets done at 2 in the morning, Amara was at the nurse's station when one of the suited men approached her. He bowed. A proper bow. The kind that meant something. He said that Mori-sama wished to express his gratitude. He said Mori-sama wished to know her name. She gave it. Her full name, Amara Osei. She spelled it. The man wrote it down very carefully. She went back to her paperwork. She told herself she did not think about it again. That was not entirely true. She thought about the dragon on his ribs, the way the ink caught the light when she had pressed her hands against his side. She thought about it for 90 seconds, and then she put it in the part of her mind where she kept beautiful things that were not hers, and she went home. That night she slept. Without dreaming. She did not know that across the city, in a building in the financial district where the ceramics on the shelves were older than the walls themselves, Kenji Mori was awake and asking questions about a woman who had treated him when everyone paid to do so had decided not to. 3 weeks passed. The hospital filed a review of the admission. Amara was called to give her account. She gave it simply, without apology. The review board decided no policy had technically been violated because no formal admission had technically been processed before treatment began. She was given a verbal note for operating outside attending physician's supervision. She thanked them and went back to work. On the 4th week, flowers arrived at the nurse's station. 30 stems. White chrysanthemums in a plain glass vase. No card. Hayashi raised an eyebrow. Amara said she did not know anything about them and went to check on her patients. She suspected. She said nothing. 2 days after the flowers, a man came to the hospital and asked to speak with her privately. He was the same man who had bowed in the corridor. His name was Sato. He was the person Kenji Mori trusted with things he did not trust to anyone else. He had been in the organization since 19. He was now 43. He had a stillness to him that was not menace but something adjacent to it. He told her that Mori-sama wished to offer a formal expression of gratitude. A dinner had been arranged. He told her, very precisely, that she was under no obligation. She looked at him for a long moment. She said she would think about it. Sato bowed and left. She went back and forth about it for 4 days. She ultimately decided that the problem with accepting gratitude from someone in Kenji Mori's position was that it rarely stayed gratitude. She sent a polite message through Sato declining. Mori sent one back. It said, "Then allow me to come to you." She stared at that for a long time. She typed, "That would not be appropriate." He sent back, "I am aware. I am asking anyway." She put her phone down. She picked it up. She put it down again. She typed, "Wednesday. There is a tea shop near the hospital. It closes at 9. He was there at 8:45. He arrived without the suited men. He was wearing a plain dark jacket. He looked like someone who had made a deliberate effort not to look like himself, and it had mostly worked. He stood when she came in. He waited until she sat before he sat. He said, "I owe you my life." She said, "You owe me nothing. I was doing my job." He said, "The physician decided not to do his job." She said, "That is between him and his conscience." He said, "I would like to know how you are." She looked at him. He was not making conversation. He was asking because he wanted to know. She had met very few people who asked questions because they actually wanted the answers. The experience was disorienting. She told him she was fine. The review had been resolved. She was not worried. He said he had heard about the review. He said he had made certain it would not affect her position. She set down her cup. She said she had not asked him to do that. He said he knew. She said she needed him to understand that she did not want to be managed. He said he understood. He had not managed her. He had managed the situation, which was different. She thought about that. She decided she did not entirely disagree. They talked for another hour. He asked where she was from. He asked how long she had been a nurse. He asked what had made her decide to stay. He listened with the focused attention of a man accustomed to receiving information and distilling it. She found herself saying more than she intended. She noticed this. She was not sure how she felt about it. When the shop closed, he walked her to the corner. He said goodnight. He did not ask for her number. He did not suggest they meet again. In the taxi home, she thought, "He already has my number." She was right. His message arrived that night. It said only, "Thank you." She typed, "For what?" He said, "For talking to me like I was a person." She held that for a long time in the dark of her apartment. She typed, "You are a person." He did not respond. She thought later that this might have been the moment, not the trauma bay, not the tea shop. This, 2 words, plainly meant, offered without hesitation. He had not heard that in a long time. She had not thought twice about saying it. That was perhaps the thing he found most extraordinary of all. They met 4 more times over the following 6 weeks. Tea, once, dinner at a quiet restaurant where the menu was not in a language she read fluently, and he translated without being asked, which she liked more than she expected. Once, a walk through a park in the early evening because she had said she liked parks and he had said he never went to them, and she said that was a waste. He was not easy company. He was contained in a way that required patience. She was not a patient person by nature, only by practice. He did not offer things easily. He said what he meant when he meant it. He was silent when he did not mean anything. She found this more restful than most people's conversation. The evening that moved something was not a dramatic one. It was a Tuesday. Her shift had run 40 minutes over because 2 nurses called in sick, and there was nobody to cover. It was raining when she finally came out. Not the light city rain she had learned to like. The kind that came down sideways and meant it. She had no umbrella. She had forgotten it that morning, which she sometimes did when she was tired enough to leave the apartment running on function rather than thought. She was standing under the hospital entrance awning trying to decide whether to wait or run for the train when Sato appeared. He had an umbrella. He held it out without a word. She looked at it. She said, "Did he send you?" Sato said, "Mori-sama noticed the forecast this afternoon." She looked at the umbrella. She looked at the rain. She took the umbrella. She said, "How does he know my schedule?" Sato said, "He asked Hayashi." She said, and Hayashi told him. Sato said, Hayashi said, and I am quoting precisely, that if a man asked her that question it was because he was worried, and that she had seen quite enough nurses walk home sick in the rain, and that she would not be obstructing that particular effort. Amara stood with that for a moment. She said, Hayashi said that. Sato said, those were her words. She walked home in the rain under someone else's umbrella, and she did not analyze what that meant. Or she tried not to, which is not the same thing. That night he texted. It said, "Get home safe?" She replied, "Dry." Thanks to Hayashi, apparently, he replied, "Hayashi is a formidable woman." She replied, "She is going to find out I said that, and it is going to go directly to her head." He replied, "Good." She looked at that word on her screen. One word, and the warmth of it. The uncomplicated warmth of someone who wanted good things for a person you cared about, for no reason, except that you cared about them. She thought, I have not had a lot of this. She thought, I did not know how much I wanted it until just now. The next time they met was not at the tea shop. He asked if she wanted to see something. She said yes without asking what it was, which was not like her, but she said it anyway. He took her to a building in a quiet part of the city, a converted warehouse with high windows, where a man he knew kept a collection of prints, woodblock work, landscapes and figures, waves that looked like they were still moving. She stood in front of one for a long time. A woman in a storm, not frightened, just present in it. He stood beside her. He said, "You remind me of that." She said, "The storm or the woman?" He said, "The woman. The way she is just standing in it, not trying to leave." She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I spent a long time thinking that was weakness, standing in things." He said, "What changed?" She said, "I got old enough to realize that people who run from everything spend all their time running and never get anywhere." He said, "How old?" She said, 28. It was a specific Tuesday. He said, "What happened on that Tuesday?" She said, "I had a patient, 19 years old. He had been running from something for so long he had run himself off a bridge, not on purpose. He just stopped watching where he was going." She said, "He lived. I kept him alive. And he looked at me after and said he was tired. Not of living, of running." He said it like it surprised him. She said, "I thought about that for a long time." He was quiet beside her. He said, "And you decided to stop running?" She said, "I decided to try. I am still trying." He said, "You seem like someone who succeeds at what she decides to try." She said, "Mostly. I still forget my umbrella." He looked at her. He said very quietly, "You will never need to remember it again." She looked at the print, the woman in the storm, standing still, not afraid, the waves frozen just before they broke. She thought, something has just been promised. Not in the language of promises, in the older language, the one that does not need ceremony. She thought, I heard it. She was careful. She told herself she was being careful. What she was actually doing was falling. Quietly, precisely. The way people fall when they have convinced themselves they are not falling. One careful step at a time into something with no floor. She did not know that the whole organization had noticed. She did not know that Sato had begun to refer to her in internal conversation simply as the nurse. A designation that carried more weight than her name had the night she gave it. She did not know that 3 senior men had expressed opinions about the situation. All concerned. One more pointed than the others. She did not know that the woman who would become Kenji Mori's fiancée had already been selected. Selected, in fact, before the first tea at the shop near the hospital. Before the park. Before you are a person sent into a dark apartment at 11 at night. She found out on a Tuesday. Hayashi mentioned it, not unkindly. The announcement was expected at the end of the month. Amara went to the supply closet and stood very still for 2 minutes. Then she went back to work. She did not text him. She did not call. She told herself she had nothing to contact him about. There was nothing between them that had been named, and you could not grieve a thing that had never been given a name. That night she wrote the resignation letter. Carefully she said she had decided to pursue a position at a different hospital. She said she was grateful for her time here. She said she hoped to leave in good standing. She addressed it to HR. She sent a copy to Hayashi, who deserved the courtesy of being told directly. She sent the email at 8 in the morning. By 8:15, Sato had called. She did not answer. By 8:30, Kenji Mori had called. She answered. She was not proud of it. But she answered. He said, "Come to the office." She said, "I have submitted my resignation. I am not sure what there is to discuss." He said, "Come to the office." She said his name. He said her name. Just Amara, the way he said it when they were not in any particular arrangement of roles. When it was just him and her, and the space between them that had never been named. He said it like something he was trying to hold carefully, and not drop. She went to the office. The building was in a commercial district. It looked like a real estate company from the outside, which it partially was. The lobby had marble floors. The receptionist did not blink. Sato met her at the elevator. He did not speak. He brought her to a room on the 14th floor. The windows looked out over the city. The furniture was expensive in the particular way of things that do not need to announce themselves. Kenji Mori was standing at the window. He turned when she came in. Sato left. The door closed. She said, "I came to tell you in person that I am leaving. I wanted to say it to your face." He said, "You are not leaving." She looked at him. She said, "I think you will find that I am." He said, "Sit down." She said, "I would rather stand." He crossed the room. He stood in front of her, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw. The careful control of a man very close to something he did not allow himself to express. He said, "I am aware of what you have heard. I am asking you not to decide based on it." She said, "I am not deciding based on anything. I am leaving because it is time to leave." He said, "That is not true." She said, "You don't know that." He said, "I know you. I know when you are being honest and when you are protecting yourself." She said, "Don't do that. Don't tell me what I am." He said, "I am not telling you what you are. I am telling you that I can see you. I have always been able to see you. That is not going to stop because you have decided to remove yourself from the room." She was quiet. Outside, the city moved, millions of people going about their business. She said, "There is going to be an announcement at the end of the month." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you are going to tell me that changes nothing." He was quiet. He did not say that. She said, "So it changes something." He said, "The announcement is not a choice I made for the reasons you think." She said, "Then explain it." He said, "This organization has obligations, alliances, things that existed before I did and will exist after me. I did not choose the arrangement. She said, but you are accepting it. He looked at her. He said, I am asking you not to go. She said, that is not an answer. He said, I know. I am asking you anyway. She thought of the tea shop, the park. You are a person. She thought of all the things that had never been said because neither of them had been willing to say them first. She thought of how that carefulness had turned into cowardice she had mistaken for wisdom. She said, if I stay, what am I staying for? He said, for me. Because I am asking you to. Because I will spend whatever time I have finding a way through this that does not require you to leave. She said, that is not a plan, that is a feeling. He said, I know. She said, I need more than a feeling. He said, I know that too. Give me the chance to give you more. The room was very quiet. She said, you have until the announcement. He said, that is 3 weeks. She said, yes. She left. She did not look back. That was harder than it sounds. She did not withdraw the resignation. She left it with HR. Active, the exit she had already built. She went back to her shifts and she worked, and she did not think about him, which meant she thought about him continuously in the part that ran underneath thought. What she did not know was that the moment she left the building, Kenji Mori made a call. Then another. Then a third. He called men he had not asked favors of in years. He called a lawyer in another city who owed him something old. He called his second, a man named Fujiwara, who had been with the organization since before Mori had taken it over. Fujiwara had opinions about everything and was always willing to share them. Fujiwara told him, directly, that what he was proposing was impossible. He used the word twice. Impossible. And then again, impossible. Mori listened. He thanked Fujiwara. He told him to find a way. Fujiwara said, and the alliance? Mori said, find another arrangement. Fujiwara was quiet. He said, this is about the nurse. Mori said, find another arrangement. Fujiwara found another arrangement. It took 11 days. 11 days in which Amara Osei worked her regular shifts, declined 2 calls from Kenji Mori, accepted 1, spoke to him for 22 minutes about nothing directly relevant and everything that was. She went home and looked at her resignation letter sitting in the HR queue and did not withdraw it. On the 12th day, Sato appeared at the hospital just before her shift ended. He handed her an envelope. He said Mori-sama asked that she read it that night. She read it in the taxi home. It was not a love letter. Kenji Mori did not write love letters. It was a document. Brief, precise, factual, it described what had been negotiated. The engagement was cancelled. The alliance had been redirected through a different structure that Fujiwara had apparently constructed at significant personal inconvenience. It listed what this had cost, not to impress her, to be honest. Because he thought she deserved honesty more than she deserved to be managed. He had learned that from her. At the bottom, one line in his handwriting, I do not have better words than these. I am asking you to stay. She sat in the stop taxi for a long time. Then she called him. She said, I am withdrawing the resignation. He was quiet for a moment. He said, are you sure? She said, I was sure before the letter. The letter was good. He said, Fujiwara wrote most of it. She said, which parts did you write? He said, the last line. She said, yes. I know. She could hear him breathe. In the background, somewhere in his building, a door. The city. The particular sound of it at 9 in the evening. She said, I need you to understand that I will not behave as though I owe you anything for this. He said, I know. She said, and I will not be invisible, not to anyone. He said, I know. She said, then we can talk tomorrow. He said, tomorrow. She hung up. She looked out at the city, a million lighted windows. All those rooms. All those lives. She thought, some of them contain people who have been chosen, not defaulted to, not accepted, not tolerated. Chosen. That is what just happened. Days later, the news that there would be no engagement moved through the relevant circles. These things travel fast in closed worlds. The woman who had been part of the arrangement said nothing publicly. Her family said nothing publicly. Privately, a number of things were said. Some of them pointed toward the nurse at the hospital, who had, as one person put it, made herself rather too comfortable. Amara was not told about this. She continued her work. She and Kenji Mori met twice that week. TA restaurant where he translated the menu without being asked. He was careful with her. Not tentative. She had no patience for tentative, but deliberate. The way you are careful with something valuable when you have just understood what it would mean to lose it. She was learning what it felt like to be seen steadily. She had thought it was the same as being seen suddenly. It was not. There was a shift one night about 3 weeks after the canceled engagement news. She was coming out of the hospital at midnight, and there was a car she did not recognize idling across the street. It was there when she arrived. It was still there when she left. She walked to the train. She did not run. She did not look back more than once. She texted Sato, car on the north side of the hospital. Dark gray. Didn't move. Sato responded in 40 seconds, noted. Walk to the station normally. I will call you. He called. He said it was handled. He said, you did the right thing texting me immediately. He said, Mori-sama says the same. She said, was it someone from the family? Sato said, we are not yet certain. She said, Sato, was it someone from the family? He was quiet for a moment. He said, probably, yes. She sat with that on the train home. She was not afraid, exactly. She was clear-eyed. She had grown up in a world that presented obstacles in many forms, and she had learned to see them for what they were. Information. Not verdicts. Just information. The information right now was that someone was unhappy enough to send a message. The information was that the message had been received and removed. The information was that she was being looked after by people who were very good at that. She thought, I have never had anyone be very good at that on my behalf. She thought, I should probably feel something bigger about this. She did not. She felt steady. She felt, for the first time in as long as she could remember, something close to safe. The tenderness came quietly, which she had not expected. She had expected difficulty. She had not expected this particular kind of ease. One evening she came to the office after her shift ended, and he was still in a meeting that ran late. Sato set her up in an adjacent room with tea and a stack of architecture magazines, which was an oddly specific choice until she realized he had probably found out from someone that she had studied architecture for 2 years before nursing. He had. She did not ask how he knew. She read the magazines. When Kenji Mori appeared in the doorway 40 minutes later, he looked at her sitting there with a magazine across her lap, and something in his face shifted. It was brief. He was careful about his face. But she saw it. She was good at reading what people's faces were doing underneath what they were showing. She said, you found out about architecture school. He said, Sato found out about architecture school. She said, and you told him to leave me the magazines. He said, I told him to make you comfortable. She said, that is a very specific interpretation of comfortable. He said, he is a perceptive man. She looked at him. She thought, This is what it looks like when someone pays attention. Not the performing of attention. The actual thing. The thing where you notice what a person likes before they have told you they like it, because you have been watching them closely enough to know. She said thank you. He nodded once. He sat across from her. He asked if she was hungry. She said yes. He picked up his phone and called someone and spoke briefly, and then set it down. She did not ask what was coming. She waited. 40 minutes later, food arrived from a restaurant she had mentioned once, in passing, 3 weeks earlier. She looked at the containers. She looked at him. He looked at the wall and said, "Sato noted you liked the place." She said, "Sato has an extraordinary memory." Kenji Mori said nothing. She decided not to press it. They ate. They talked about things that did not matter. In the particular way of two people who have already decided that they are going to keep talking about things forever, and so tonight's things do not need to be important. He told her for the first time something about where he had grown up. A city farther south. A grandmother who made a noodle dish he had not tasted since she died. A boy who had spent years being looked through by adults who had already decided he was not worth the attention. She did not say, "That sounds familiar." She did not have to. He saw that she recognized it. She saw that he saw. That was the night something moved between them, from arrangement to fact. 4 weeks in, the problem arrived. It came in the form of a woman named Sakurai Reiko. She was 41. She had the bearing of someone who had sat in important rooms for a long time and found them satisfactory. She was connected to the family whose engagement had been canceled. She came to the hospital. She came to the nurse's station on Amara's floor. She asked pleasantly to speak with the nurse who had been seeing private patients, referred through the Mori organization. The junior nurse came to find Amara. Amara came to the station. Sakurai Reiko looked at her. The expression was one Amara had seen before, in different rooms, from different people. The expression that does not know what to do with what it is seeing and resolves the confusion by deciding it is not worth seeing. She said, "I understand you have formed a friendship with Kenji Mori." Amara said, "I treated him medically. What I have or have not formed beyond that is my own business." Sakurai said, "I wonder if you understand the context you have inserted yourself into." Amara said, "I wonder if you understand that I did not insert myself anywhere. I was doing my job." Sakurai said, "That may be. But the consequences of this situation extend beyond a hospital shift. There are families affected. There are arrangements that have been disrupted." Amara said, "I am aware arrangements were disrupted. I was not the one who disrupted them." Sakurai said, and her voice lowered, and it became something harder than pleasantness, "You should think carefully about your position here. You are a foreign national. Your visa requires continued employment. Your employment depends on this hospital. This hospital has relationships that depend on certain courtesies being maintained." She let that sit. Amara looked at her. She felt the room, the junior nurse behind the station, very still. The usual hospital noise, continuing around this particular silence as though it did not exist. She said, "Are you threatening my visa status?" Sakurai said, "I am offering you a perspective." Amara said, "I have one of my own, thank you." Sakurai said, "I imagine you do. I imagine you have faced obstacles before. I imagine you are confident in your ability to manage them." Amara said, "Yes." Sakurai said, "You should know that not all obstacles can be managed." She left. Amara watched her go. She went to the supply cupboard and stood there for a different kind of 2 minutes. Then she called Kenji Mori. She told him what had happened. Word for word, no editorializing, just the facts. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Where are you?" She said, "At work." He said, "Are you safe?" She said, "Yes, I am fine." He said, "I will handle this." She said, "I know. I am not calling you to handle it. I am calling you because I said I would not be invisible. That means I tell you when things happen." He was quiet. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Also because I wanted to hear your voice. But mostly the first thing." He said, "Also thank you for that." What Amara did not know, because she was at work and had a floor to manage, was that the conversation between Kenji Mori and Sato that followed was brief and pointed, and the conversation between Mori and a man named Tota was long and deliberate. Tota was senior to everyone except Mori. He had been doing this since before most of the current organization was born. He had 3 things in his life he valued. One of them was being correct. The conversation ended with Tota saying something he had not said in over a decade. He said, "I approve." 2 words. In the context of who Tota was and what he had seen, and what he generally did not say, those 2 words carried the weight of a ruling. Sato, who was present, told this to Fujiwara. Fujiwara said nothing, and then went to find a very good bottle of rice wine. The message that went to the relevant family the next morning was precise and final. It came from a level of the organization they had not known they were dealing with. It said, in the language of such messages, that this matter was closed. Nothing was done to anyone. Nothing needed to be. The message was the thing. Amara received flowers again. She called Kenji Mori and told him she did not need flowers every time someone was difficult to her. He said the flowers were not for the difficulty. She said, "What were they for?" He said, "For telling me." She kept the flowers. 3 months passed. Not easily. Nothing in this story moved easily. But forward. What happened in those months was the specific accumulation of chosen things. He learned she liked her tea dark and not sweet. That she hated the word journey used as a metaphor. That she could name every bone in the human body and still somehow managed to stub her toe on the same chair leg 3 times a week. She learned that he had not been raised in the organization by blood, but by circumstance. The man who had been his leader before he became one himself had found him at 17 in a situation he did not describe clearly. The man had put him to work. Then kept him, had made him, over 20 years, into something the man had seen before the boy did. That man was dead now. Kenji Mori wore the weight of the organization the way you wear something given to you before you knew the full cost. Not regretfully, but heavily. She told him once that he was allowed to put it down sometimes. He said he did not know how. She said, "You are doing it right now." He looked at the table between them. The teacups. The afternoon light coming through the window. He said, "So I am." The occasion that finally settled everything, not between them, that had already settled, but in the world around them, came in the 5th month. It was a hospital review board meeting. Convened to address a formal complaint, an undocumented medication protocol deviation flagged 7 months earlier. The deviation was the night Amara had treated Kenji Mori without attending physician supervision. The complaint had been refiled with additional documentation. The name of whoever filed it did not appear on the paperwork. The meeting was attended by the chief of medicine, 3 board members, the charge nurse, Hayashi, the attending physician who had left the room, and Amara Osei. She was asked to give her account. She gave it, simply, without apology. The same account she had given the first time. The attending physician gave his. He said he had assessed the risk level and made a clinical decision to defer. The board asked Hayashi whether she had documentation of the supply requisition filed by Osei before the incident in question. Hayashi produced it from a folder she had brought to the meeting, which suggested she had anticipated this moment. That was the kind of thing Hayashi did without ever discussing it. The board asked the attending physician whether he had reviewed the requisition. He said he had not had time. The board asked whether anyone had reviewed it. Hayashi said that Osei had flagged it, had moved backup units to the trauma bay, had been the only senior clinician in position when the patients arrived, and had kept a man in critical condition stable until resources could be properly applied. The attending physician said this did not address the protocol issue. Hayashi said, with respect, the protocol issue is that the protocol requires a senior physician present. One was not present. Osei did not create that gap. She filled it. The board was quiet. What happened next was not what Amara had expected. The chief of medicine, a man named Yamamoto, who she had spoken to perhaps 3 times in her career, asked the attending physician a single question. He asked, if Osei had not been there that night, what would the outcome have been for that patient? The attending physician said, I cannot say for certain. Yamamoto said, make an estimate. The attending physician was quiet for a long time. He said likely fatal or near-fatal outcome without immediate intervention. Yamamoto said, and Osei provided that intervention. It was not a question. The board deliberated for 40 minutes. They returned and said the complaint was dismissed. They said the record notation from the original review was to be struck. They said the hospital would review its policies around patients whose admission might present administrative complexities. Those complexities would not, in future, be used as a reason to delay care. The attending physician did not look at her. What happened next was not planned and was not engineered, and was, in her view, the most important thing that happened in that room. Yamamoto turned to the attending physician. He said, very plainly, I would like you to address your colleague by her correct title. The room went still. The attending physician said, I'm sorry. Yamamoto said, her title. Please use it. The attending physician looked at Amara. She could see him calculating. She could see him understanding that the room had shifted underneath him and that there was no floor in the direction he had been walking. He said, Dr. Osei, and then he stopped. He said, I am sorry, Nurse Osei. I should have stayed. She looked at him. She said, yes, you should have. She said it without heat, without triumph. She said it the way you state a thing that is simply true, because it was simply true, and she had learned a long time ago that the truth landed harder without dressing. The room was very quiet. Hayashi, seated 2 chairs from Amara, did not move her face in any particular direction. But she put her hand flat on the table, briefly, in Amara's direction, the way you might tap a surface to indicate that something had just been set right. Amara sat very straight. She thanked the board. She said it looking at Yamamoto, who had asked the right question at the right moment. She knew about the right question at the right moment. She walked out of that room and into the corridor and stood there for a breath. 7 years of nursing. 3 hospitals. 1 country she had left and 1 she had chosen. She had been trained not to need things to land, only to keep moving to the next thing that required her. She was very good at that. She had built her whole career on it. Standing in that corridor, she let it land. The complaint was dismissed. The note was struck. She had been called by her correct title, out loud, in front of people who had watched the wrong thing happen and done nothing to stop it. She had not asked for it. It had been given anyway. She was not a person who cried about professional outcomes. She was not crying. She was simply standing very still in a corridor, while something inside her that had been braced for a very long time took one careful breath. Then, she walked to the lobby. Sato was waiting. She looked at him. He said, "Mori-sama wished to know the outcome." She said, the complaint was dismissed. Sato bowed, not the brief professional bow, the other kind, the kind that lasted a half-second too long, the kind that said something his face would not. She said, "Did he have anything to do with what happened in there?" Sato considered this. He said, Mori-sama expressed an interest in whether the board's composition reflected the full scope of relevant institutional leadership. She said. And Sato said, Yamamoto's brother-in-law is a member of a business association in which Mori-sama has a long-standing relationship. She stood with that for a moment. She said, but no one told him what to say. Sato said, Mori-sama does not ask people to say things. He asks people to be in the room. She said, right. She thought about this on the train home. She thought about the difference between being managed and being supported. She had told him that mattered to her. She thought about whether what had just happened was one or the other. She decided it was support. Nobody had spoken for her. Somebody had made sure the right person was present to ask the right question. After that, she had spoken for herself. Before she called him, something else happened. She was at the elevator when Hayashi appeared beside her. Hayashi moved quietly for a woman who had been on her feet for 11 hours. She always had. They rode the elevator down in silence. The kind of silence between two people who have shared a floor for 3 years and do not need to fill every moment with sound. Hayashi said, as they reached the ground floor, "You handled that well." Amara said, "You brought the folder." Hayashi said, "I have been keeping that folder since the original review." Amara looked at her. She said, "Why?" Hayashi said, "Because I have been doing this job for 20 years. I know when a problem is going to come back, and I know when the person at the center of it is worth the inconvenience of being prepared." Amara was quiet for a moment. She said, "Thank you, Hayashi-san." Hayashi said, "Don't make it into something large. I kept a folder. That is all." She said it in the way that people say that is all when they mean the exact opposite, the way they minimize the thing they have done because the doing of it was the point, not the recognition. Amara recognized it anyway. She said, "I will try." Hayashi said, "Also, I told the man this morning, when he called to ask how it went before you did, that you were fine and that the outcome was correct and that he could stop worrying." Amara stopped walking. She said, "He called before I did," Hayashi said, at 8:47, before the board had even finished deliberating. Amara said, "He did not tell me that." Hayashi said, "No, he would not." She said it with the even tone of a woman who had seen many things in 20 years and understood most of them. She went back to her floor. Amara stood in the lobby for a moment. She thought, he was already asking about me before he knew it had gone well. She thought, he wanted to know that I was all right, not the outcome. Me, she called him. She said, "Yamamoto." He said, "Yes." She said, "That is support." He said, "I know the difference." She said, "I know you do." A pause. Then she said, "Thank you." He said, "You built that outcome. I only made sure the room was properly furnished." She said, "You are going to have to stop saying things like that." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because it makes it very difficult to maintain any sort of equilibrium." He was quiet. She heard what might have been a smile in the silence. That is a thing you learn to hear when you have been paying close attention to someone long enough. He said, "That is not my intention." She said, "I know what your intention is." He said, "Tell me." She said, "You intend to be exactly what you are, continuously, until I stop pretending that is not precisely what I wanted." The silence went on long enough that she wondered if she had said too much. Then he said, "Yes, that is my intention exactly." She got off the train at her station. The night was cold and clear. The convenience store on the corner was lit up gold. It always was. She had decided she loved that about this city. The way it stayed lit for you at any hour. The way it made room for you without making a fuss about it. She stood on the platform for a moment. She thought, "I have been here 3 years. This is the first time I have felt like I was actually here. Not visiting. Not passing through. Not making do until something better came along. Here." She went home. 6 months later, 6 months of things being what they were, named and steady, there was a dinner. Not the tea shop. Not a restaurant. A private room in a building where the ceramics on the shelves were older than the walls. The kind of quiet that is not empty, but full. 8 people at the table. Sato was there. Fujiwara, who had decided she was acceptable. With very few words and one long observational silence, Tota, who had said "I approve," who nodded at her when she came into the room in a way that meant more than most conversations. There were 2 others whose names she was given carefully, with explanations she understood were being offered as a form of respect. She received them the same way. She had been nervous about this dinner for exactly 2 days, and then had decided to stop being nervous about it, because nervousness was not going to help, and competence was, and she was very competent. She had walked into difficult rooms before. She had walked into a trauma bay at midnight with a man bleeding on her table, and every authority telling her it was not her problem. She could walk into a dinner. She walked in. There were toasts. There was food she did not entirely know how to eat, and she ate it anyway. Kenji Mori, beside her, very quietly indicated which implement did what. She thanked him. He said, "You're welcome." Fujiwara, across the table, found something interesting to examine on the far wall. At one point, Tota addressed her directly. He asked how long she had been in Japan. She told him. He asked whether she intended to stay. She said she did. He said, "Good." He went back to his food. She understood this was the longest and most consequential speech he had made in months. She accepted it as such. Later, when the dinner was over and the room had emptied to just the 2 of them, he turned and said, "I want to say something." She said, "Then say it." He said, "I have been in this organization for 20 years. In 20 years, I have had people who were loyal to me, people who were afraid of me, people who wanted things from me. I have not had someone who was none of those things. I have not had someone who talked to me the way you do. I did not know that was something I was missing until you were there, and I could see what the gap had been." He said, "I am not going to try to put this in better language. I do not have better language." She looked at him. She thought of the trauma bay, the tattoo, the 2 suited men stepping back. She thought of the tea shop and the park, and the print of the woman in the storm, standing still, not afraid. She thought of the umbrella. She thought of the letter, the last line in his handwriting, the resignation she had withdrawn and never refiled. She thought of the boy at 17 that no one had seen, and the woman on the overnight shift that no one had seen, and what it meant that 2 invisible people had, against considerable odds, become visible to each other. She said, "I know. That is why I stayed." He reached across the table, not quickly. He placed his hand over hers. That was all. That was everything. Outside, the city did what it always does. It continued. Bright and vast and indifferent in the way cities are indifferent. Making room without making a fuss. Carrying its million lit rooms through the dark. Some things take a long time to arrive. They spend years in transit. Held up by every reason it is not the right moment. Misaddressed, rerouted through all the places a person tells themselves it should go before they admit where it was always going. And then, one night, they land. Quietly, right in front of you. And you realize you were never waiting for them to appear. You were waiting until you trusted yourself enough to open the door. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Not the ones who said nothing, the ones who had everything to say, and waited for the right moment, and then said it plainly, and meant every word. If this story stayed with you, drop in the comments the moment that got you. We read every single one. Vote for part 2 below if you want to see what happened when she finally met the man who had raised him. If you know someone who has ever had to choose between leaving and being invisible, send them this. They need to hear it.